This is cool. And then on the other hand, I don't think the camera does a good enough job at showing how silly all this is. It's nuts, man. All right, a new day, another day here in the garage, and I gotta tell you, coming in this morning and seeing not only the full tail, but now the rudder on this thing makes it even more ridiculous that it's sitting here in my relatively tiny garage. But I love it. I love coming down and seeing that this thing is becoming an airplane right here in this space. All right, today's task, I'm gonna hook that rudder up to those pedals. Let's get to it. All right, it turns out I may have been, as usual, a little too eager, in this case, to jump into the cockpit. And understandably so, I love spending time up there. The process of getting this control surface hooked up is to first get the rudder stops installed. And to get the rudder stops installed, we need to determine full deflection of the rudder. Definitely one of the more complicated tiny little pieces I've had to fabricate in a while. I had to stare at this. There's a ton of dimensions on this 3 view. I think I got a handle on it. We'll get them made. Now, I want to be careful. I have heard of people needing to make these twice because the plans can be a bit misleading. I don't really have the material to paint myself into that corner. The scrap that I'm working with that I found, I think maybe gives me enough for 3. So there'll be a lot of taking it over to the plane and making sure this is going to work out. I've gone about this really cautiously, which is an entirely new feeling for me, but I can see why so many builders have created these twice. I don't think it's necessarily that the plans are inaccurate. I just think that the dimensions of this thing are so critical and there's so many variables back here on the tail that you'd be hard pressed to provide a plan that gives you an exact dimension that's going to wind up with that throw being perfect. If this thing moves just a 30-second one way or the other, it throws all the angles off. I've made an initial mark that's much more conservative than what's given by the plans. I'm going to start by creating it with that and getting it drilled into place and clecoed into place, and then see where my final dimension will land. Once I drilled that hole, I was really sort of committed. And it works. It's just way different than what the plans say. I guess that's okay. I'm also not parallel with the bottom of the skin here. I think before I go any further, I'll fabricate the other side and see if anything enlightening happens. Well, side 1 looks nearly identical to side 2. Which makes me feel good, but it doesn't. I mean, symmetrical is good, right? Symmetrical means things are the same from side to side. However, I sort of wish that side 2 would have came out looking like the plan and given me some clarity on perhaps what was wrong with side 1. Regardless, the throw is lining up like it should, and the parts look fairly close. I'm gonna go ahead and go with it. All right, the aileron trim kit. Quick funny story, I guess. I was sort of under the impression that the trim kit went in the wing. And when Scott was here checking out the plane, I think I alluded to the fact that, you know, I'll put the trim kit in when I get to finishing the wings. And he commented that, well, it should go in the fuselage. And that was the original impression that I was under, except my instructions, I thought, said it went in the wing. Anyways, we moved past that, and a couple weeks ago I got the trim kit out to go ahead and put it in the plane, and sure as shit it says it's going in the wing. And I'm a bit confused until I look, and it strangely also says that I have the trim kit for an RV-10 or 14. And I thought that's odd, you know, maybe they repurposed it for the 7. I had no idea. But I went and I looked at my inventory kit, and there it also says that I was shipped the trim kit for the 10 or 14. And then I went online and I saw that indeed they have a trim kit for the 7 and 9, and that's probably what I should have. Quick call to Vans, kind of quick call to Vans. It was a little difficult to get through, but once I did, we confirmed I got the wrong trim kit. And so they were very quick to swap it out. They shipped me out the new parts, and now I got the correct instructions that indeed show this thing going in the fuselage of the plane. Now, one difficult part is it's going right on the opposite side of a seat rib where I put my lighting control board. I did that with little care because I, at the time, was under the assumption that the trim kit was not going there, it was going in the wing. We'll see if it infringes upon the installation of this thing. If it does, we might have to start moving some things around. Hopefully not. But let's get right into it. Aileron trim kit coming up. There's a couple nut plates that need to come out. They should never have gone in. In fact, they're going to be reinstalled on the bottom of this thing. And this whole contraption will get screwed together along with the seat floors. Other than removing the nut plates, I'll also need to figure out what to do with those previously dimpled holes, as they will need to be flattened or drilled out to a degree where that dimple no longer exists. That was brutal. I spent over 3 hours in the plane trying to get that box installed. I don't know if it's because I'm attacking it somewhat late in the game. I've got a control tube running through that tunnel, but everything combined, there's no room. It's nearly impossible to get these screws in place, much less tightened down. That was rough. It's in, and at first it didn't work. I thought that was bizarre because my wiring thus far has been solid. And then I remembered that I have a big pigtail that needs to go, an extension that needs to go from the wing root out to the wing, because the servo's out there and the trim isn't going to work unless it's running through the servo. There are fail-safes, just in case anybody's worried that if that Garmin servo ever fails, it does have an automatic connection so the trim will still work. But if everything's completely unplugged, it's not going to work. And so I plugged it in, and it's working like a charm. We got it calibrated. I got full left and right movement. I did need to reverse 2 wires. The servo motor was running backwards, and you don't adjust that in the Garmin config mode. There is a reverse ability within there, but that is not to reverse the motor. That's to reverse automatic trim. So if automatic trim is running backwards and you have sort of a negative feedback loop where it keeps trimming itself worse and worse, that is what you use that reverse point for. If your actual hat switch is responding correctly, but your motor is running backwards, the solution there is to reverse one of the wires. And so I did that. Wiring chart has been updated to reflect that. And now all that's left is to hook it up to the sticks themselves and then get some tidying done on all the wiring throughout this area. I've got over 43 minutes of me sitting in this position swearing at the plane. Maybe I should start a Patreon channel and charge people admission. Put the whole thing up, uncut. Look, I'm not going to put you through that, paid or otherwise. Here's the deal. You got to hook up that little arm thing to a couple springs that tie into the control sticks. It's tight, it's difficult, you cut your hands up, but in the end, you finally get it done. We move on to bigger and better things. The last thing here is just to add a bunch of cable organizers, probably at least one Adele clamp and some cable tie mounts and a Dutch connector mount like you've seen me do before. So I get everything tidied up and nothing's rubbing on anything at all extremes of the control movements. I'm moving on because I'm about tired of this one. Golly. What a nightmare. I've essentially spent the last two and a half hours with some minor fittings related to the trim. It's tight. Once things get this tight, progress grinds to a halt. But it's done. I am tired working in cramped areas on small things. So I'm going to move to something a little bit larger. Those were some stressful rivets, but I got them in. I got a note, adding those rivets definitely pulled everything together, and in doing so left me with a very short 1 1/8 inch clearance. And so I'll likely check that with Vans. We're still right about 35 degrees, but I just want to be sure. Worst case scenario, they got to come out and I got to do new ones, which means basically starting from scratch. Ugh. However, there's nothing stopping us from running linkage, and so I'm going to get moving on that. So it's just temporarily held in place with some pins that I made to test the distance from the end of the cable to the rudder pedals. This distance will change based on where you have your pedals, so we're gonna have to make some brackets to ultimately tie these two together. But the pins are a great way to not screw up those brackets and still test the length. They also allow me to do this. It's cheap thrills, but it's awesome. And it's great to have some tension on the pedals. It really gives you an idea of what it's going to be like to be in this thing with all controls tethered to their surfaces. As always, getting here wasn't quite as easy as I thought it would be. And now that it's all tied into place and I like the position of the pedals, I'm going to go ahead and make those aforementioned brackets so that I can get this thing bolted down for real. All right, I got 4 identical steel brackets that I made and the rest of my hardware. I'm gonna go screw these things in. Come on. We'll be right back. If you're new here and you're thinking you might stick around, I'd love it if you'd subscribe. Keeps me motivated. I'm expecting some comments on my choice of adhesives for these little fairings. First, let's step back. These fairings I bought from Aircraft Spruce. They really make a better job of the exit of the rudder cables out of the fuselage. Otherwise, you're just looking at this little nylon tube that Vans gives you. This is not only probably a little more aerodynamic, but certainly looks like a much more finished option. I have heard most people attaching these via fuel tank sealant. Other than having the world's most horrific smell, it's sort of a bear to work with, a lot of prep and a lot of work. I'm a huge proponent of VHB tape where the application fits. Now, this isn't your foam tape that I've been cutting off of every fixture everywhere else in the plane. That foam tape shit sucks. It'll rot away in no time. VHB is a different beast. A true VHB, 3M Scotch VHB tape is impenetrable. And I'll try to link a video for those of you with enough time to watch a video about tape, but I've used this for years and years. This stuff is gold. Small example, it's how they hold the windows in skyscrapers on those big glass facades. Now, you got to get the right type. There's a billion different model numbers of VHB. You got to know what you're looking for, do some research, but it has its applications. And a flat surface of aluminum to aluminum is absolutely one. I guarantee you, you're hard pressed to get that off the plane without doing some damage.
I don't care. What are these pre-rivet thingies called again?
Clecos.
Clecos.
And there's somebody who watches that named their dog Clico.
Oh, it's a pretty cool name.
Yeah.
So, I can see why you need to go to the hangar to put in the engine. There's not quite enough room here.
Our engine mom